culture is such a complex, multi-dimensional topic, and you have to invest on a day-to-day basis in ensuring that the culture blends well with what you're trying to deliver, because you need to get people behind the purpose. You need to get people to connect with what you're trying to achieve, not only at a tactical level, but on a longer term level. So that is so complicated and so multifaceted. And that means that there has to be significant investment in making sure that people understand what is the purpose behind the organisation.
We are joined today by Andrea Lattimore. She is Vodafone's Global Director of Compliance and Business. I'm Sarah Cole, founder of Cole Forums, a high-trust network for CEOs, general counsel and senior leaders. I'm the host of Insights from the Coalface, and through my podcast, private dinners and curated events, I bring together extraordinary leaders for honest, no-filter conversations that go far beyond the boardroom. Each episode features global experts, from neuroscientists and journalists to CEOs and ethicists, sharing bold lessons and practical strategies. We explore the science of trust and motivation, the power of communication, the role of ethical leadership, and how to balance high-stakes careers with a fulfilling life. Cole Forums creates the framework. You and your peers make the magic happen. Andrea Lattimore is a seasoned compliance leader with over 20 years of experience driving integrity, culture and business transformation across global industries. As Vodafone's Global Director of Compliance and Business, she combines strategic insight with a deep passion for people, building high-performing teams and ethical cultures that thrive. Known for her bold leadership and people-first mindset, Andrea turns complex regulatory challenges into opportunities for growth and trust. She's a champion of inclusive leadership and a firm believer that strong compliance starts with empowered values and purpose-driven teams. Hi, Andrea. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Sarah? Lovely to talk to you.
Really good. It's so nice to see your friendly face again. And
you.
I'm excited to dig in because I want to hear all about the new role. But let's start a bit further back, because I'm really interested. We've never talked about this, and I think I figured out we've known each other about 15 years.
Which is a bit scary.
Very scary. What inspired you to enter this field? Because, way back then, I think it was quite an unusual field to be entering with your background. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. So I started out in finance and consultancy, and worked for Grant Thornton, and initially started in accountancy. It just really didn't motivate me or stimulate me at all. And through having some dialogue with some different customers, started to get some insights with regards to risk and compliance, and thought, this is a really interesting area, particularly because of the proximity of compliance and the macro world, and how quickly it interrelates to the business world. So whatever is going on in politics, whatever is going on in the world at large, completely links to what might be happening in the world of compliance, because it could be sanctions because of political instability, or it could be to do with the change of legislation. The two come to converge quite swiftly. So I think, one, because of the complexity of the topic, I loved sort of moving into compliance. And I think the other thing is it enables you to have such a broad portfolio of stakeholders to deal with. You're dealing with such a plethora of different individuals, and you have to influence them. You have to negotiate with them as to why it's really important to do something that might detract from their P&L. Sometimes compliance, it isn't, for me, all about the law. Sometimes it's about reputation. Sometimes it's about sort of where you perceive for the organisation from a shareholder perspective, from a social perspective. So the decisions and sort of risk appetite, it's such a complex web of decision making. So it's not hard and fast. And I think the good thing is I love the grey, because sometimes compliance is more around the grey than it is about the black and white. So that's why I love it. And I love the fact that you're dealing with so many different individuals and you're trying to nudge them in the right direction to make an informed decision that's right by the business.
I'm hearing then that you like the dynamism of the fact that it's fast paced, there's a lot of things influencing it, and there's a lot of stakeholders. So, what puts the fire in your belly is you described this grey area. So, is it kind of the herding cats type thing, or is it more than that?
I definitely think that's a part of it. I think it's also providing a different perspective to enable management to make a really informed decision. Most leaders look at a decision through their optics. Compliance brings a new optics and a new lens as to how you should be looking at something, from the risk lens, the macro social lens, how this might be perceived from a societal perspective. So I think it enables you to provide a degree of objectivity and just provide a different optic to a decision.
Digging back then, where's that commerciality come from?
I think my father had his own business, and my mum was the bookkeeper. So it was a family business. So the commerciality of what makes a good business, how you should ensure that you're customer centric, that you're looking at the margins, your cost of sale, really was instilled at a very early age. And the whole premise of customer first. And I think that's one of the key things that I certainly look possibly differently to other compliance professionals. For me, compliance, everyone in the business is my customer. And my job is to enable my customer, the business, to be successful and enable growth, enable simplicity, enable achievement of their business objectives. So my job is to support them achieve that by enabling really good informed decisions.
And was there a pivotal moment where you thought, right, this is it, this is what I'm going to go for?
It sort of happened naturally, really. I became really inquisitive. And then through that being inquisitive, it's like, I absolutely love this. And just made the transition very early, and then worked in different roles that gave me a huge amount of experience. I've had the privilege of working in many different sectors. I've worked in government, I've worked in media, I've worked with banking, and then obviously now with Vodafone. And logistics. So I've had such a diverse pool of industries and sectors that I've dealt with. But the common theme through all of it, it's all been about providing good, strong compliance to support the business needs.
And in those, let's go or stay with those early days of your career, was there a challenge that you faced that sort of molded the type of leader you are now?
Yes, I think there's been a few actually. I think one being female and having, I think as a young female leader in compliance, and I was a manager at 21, and when I was 21 and being given people leadership, completely naive as to what that actually meant. So that grounded me quite early on in my sort of beginning of the career, the path that I took. And I think what I learnt early on was that you don't need to work 24 hours a day to prove your worth and to prove your value. And I think as a young female, if I looked back and spoke to my younger self and said, what would what are the key lessons? It would be, you don't need to do 20 hours a day. You don't need to do every single piece of work that lands on your desk to manage expectations, to demonstrate that you're really good at your job. Actually, what you should be focusing on is the quality of that output and that sort of easy analysis of what's urgent and important. And I think as a young leader, I was very naive and thought that doing a good job was doing it one myself, and then also making sure that I did everything really, really quickly. And as a result, I compromised me to the point that I actually cancelled my honeymoon, which to this day I will always regret. And that was in relation to a large investigation that I did many, many years. And it was my misconception that I was really important to that investigation, so needed to be participating in it. And I learned through that experience that actually you're a better leader if you lead through your team and leverage your team's capability, their skills, rather than assuming accountability for doing it all yourself. And I compromised my health as a result. So, lots of learnings at a very early age.
And was there a mentor at least that you could look to? I mean, perhaps a female role model, or did they just not exist in your world?
Back then, God, I'm sounding really old. Um, no, there wasn't. When I started my career, I was in a predominantly male orientated organizations. My first 3 or 4 organizations were very male dominated. So I felt compelled to prove my worth through output. And it was only through maturity and, sort of having those instances where I learnt the hard way that you realized actually worth isn't in hours of delivery and execution. It's the value you contribute, and then I think toughening, actually becoming a bit of a tougher individual, and sort of not compromising on that work-life balance. As I went through different organizations, learning the value that I present personally and what my contribution is, I think it honed some of my sort of areas that I won't compromise, and that work-life balance. I think in any leadership role, absolutely, you need to come and do your best and bring your best self every day to the organization. But that does not mean that I'm going to do 18 and 19 hours a day.
Now, I'm going to contradict you there. You haven't toughened. I know you pretty well, and I know your human face is well and truly there. Maybe it's more about boundaries.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point. When I say toughened, I mean sort of being very comfortable that I have defined boundaries of what I'm not prepared to compromise. That doesn't mean that I'm toughened in terms of personality, because you know as well as Sarah, that one of the things that I'm more passionate about than anything, not only is compliance, is you're only as good as the people around you. If you don't have a good team, if you don't have people that thrive on a good work environment or a good culture, then you can't deliver. It is so important that you have a team that are happy. Happy teams create great work. Unhappy teams don't create great work.
Yes. So just if we could stay with that subject just for a moment, I think this is really digging in now to something really interesting. I think about the people who are listening to this podcast, their leaders, their CEOs, their general counsel, their chief ethics and compliance officers themselves. Why do you think so many organizations struggle to get their culture right?
Oh, great question. Why don't they get the culture right? I think it's, with any organization, you are driving to achieve your strategic objectives. Whatever those objectives are, for Vodafone, obviously it's simplicity, growth, and customer. So those are our sort of 3 key pillars. And I think it's sort of culture is such a complex, multidimensional topic, and you have to invest on a day-to-day basis in ensuring that the culture blends well with what you're trying to deliver, because you need to get people behind the purpose. You need to get people to connect with what you're trying to achieve, not only at a tactical level, but on a longer term level. So that is so complicated and so multifaceted. Um, and that means that there has to be significant investment in making sure that people understand what is the purpose behind the organization, what does bringing your best self mean for that organization in terms of, what does it mean to show up? Is it that you are an authentic leader? Is it that you are making really sound decisions, and that you're comfortable in enabling failure? I think it is, that's a killer question, I have to say, Sarah. But I think making sure culture is spot on means you have to invest daily in the leadership, at every level of the organization, and consciously. And I think that's the really important thing. It's about conscious investment and validation. So, it's easy to become a little bit rudderless when a business is trying to focus on achieving its objectives. So it's very important that there are culture check-ins, and that there is that rudder that continuously validates that leadership expectations, leadership deliverables are in line with what you want them to be from a cultural dimension as well.
So just sticking with that, because I'm really interested in this point. If you could change, say, one thing about how that's typically approached, the culture check-ins, what would it be?
I think it needs to be less survey driven. So I think most good organisations, Vodafone has a great spirit survey. We do a spirit beat check-in to get and elicit that feedback from individuals with regards to the culture. Um, I I think there's always a danger with any survey-driven culture check-ins that it can be skewed dependent on how it's being delivered and deployed. I think one of the key measures is actually having listening sessions, bringing teams together, and actually having more open dialogue and discussion that really induces a sense of psychological safety for employees. So more hub and spoke, where you're bringing individuals together from different teams. You're actually having sessions, leadership sessions, team sessions with all levels of the organization. So not just asking managers to be present, but you actually bring different colleagues together from all parts of the organization, and you do listening sessions. I think they bring a huge amount of value, because it actually creates and induces much more psychological safety. I think if you get the right people hosting them as well, it enables them to be more open and honest about what they feel and think. Always a very fine balance, but I think it can't be one dimensional when you're doing culture check-ins. I think you have to use a number of different tools in the toolkit to make sure that the culture really is intrinsically aligned with what you want as an organization.
And I couldn't agree more. I think those check-ins are absolutely critical, and I think they sort of speak to how committed the organisation is to really hearing what people are saying, whether that's positive or negative. But I wonder, one of the things that's come up time and time again on the podcast is the fact that surveys, I think they're only as good as the actions you take when you've got the results. And Is that what you mean when you say too much emphasis on surveys as well? Or are you thinking more around it's the variety of the touch points, if you see what I mean?
For me, it's the variety. I think you need a variety of touch points. I think surveys are incredibly useful as one tool in the toolkit. And there's two things. One, the questions need to be need to drive the right expectations in terms of what are you trying to achieve. So the question set is really key. Are you asking the right questions around culture? Is it focusing on the things that actually you want to get feedback on? Rather than just a list of questions, actually really won't get to the root of what you're trying to achieve. But for me, a survey should always only be one part of a toolkit. If you really want a good understanding of the culture of an organization, it has to be multifaceted. It has to involve not only a survey, but listening labs, some training. It needs to have the leverage of using speak up results as well. A good indication, particularly from any compliance function, is any whistleblowing data and speak up data that gives a sense check as to how is the health of an organisation. Do people feel psychologically safe to raise a concern? I think that's incredibly important. If you don't have speak ups, then in any organisation, that's an indication for me that actually it's not a psychologically safe environment. People don't feel comfortable. I think we're incredibly lucky in Vodafone. Well, it's not luck. I think it's judgment and also good practice. But speak up is used, and we actively encourage it because we want people to feel psychologically safe to raise their hand and say, we don't think this is right. Then we can do a robust investigation and determine, is it right, or is it not substantiated? But you have to enable a culture that people feel comfortable in putting their head above the parapet and sort of saying this doesn't feel right. And that's why I say a culture toolkit is multifaceted. You need more than one data touch point. It's not just a code of conduct survey. It's not a spirit survey. It should be so multifaceted, bringing so many different measures and lenses that gives you a rich understanding as to how good the culture is. And only a good culture enables a business to really hit its purpose and drive towards its strategic objectives, because you need the people in the business to really drive the right behaviors and know, what does good look like? What are we trying to get to? What's the North Star that we're aiming for? So for me, culture is so fundamentally important as an integral part of a business and its strategy.
Yeah, and I think you also said at the beginning of our discussion around culture that it was about authentic leadership. So I wonder what your thoughts are around how do you think leaders can strike a balance between staying authentic but also making tough, pragmatic decisions in often high pressure situations?
When I talk about bringing your best authentic self to work, I actually don't think it means anything in terms of creating a conflict in decision making. I think it's about, if you're an authentic leader, you should have the ability to articulate a decision in a conscious and considered way, being aware that obviously sometimes you're not able to articulate because there might be sort of confidential reasons that you can't provide all of the background or all the context, but you are transparent with the decisions that can be shared in a timely manner with individuals, and that you are creating a sense of trust with other leaders and teams. Authenticity for me is really, really key for a good leader, and that you're honest and people see that you're honest and open, and that when you don't know, you're actually open to say, I actually don't know. I'm not sure. And I also think being a good, authentic leader is also about being vulnerable and showing that you are vulnerable and showing that, we all have bad days and we all have good days. And that does not detract from making good, informed decisions. What it should mean is that you're eliciting the diversity of other views to enable you to make that informed decision. So a good, authentic leader sort of brings everybody to the table, and enables them to impart their judgment to enable you to make an informed decision.
No, it's extremely helpful. And I think sitting here thinking about, the people listening to the podcast and um, what they're seeking in listening, I think it gives them a really good framework. But it probably is quite scary, to be honest, the idea that you would be that vulnerable to say, well, actually, I don't know, because I think there's a lot of pressure, particularly on CEOs, general counsel, and chief ethics and compliance officers, to have all the answers. I mean, looking ahead, do you think that's how leadership will look in 10 years? A lot more sincere, almost not. It's so command and control still, in my experience, in the corporate world. What are your thoughts on that?
I would love it if it continued to shift. I think if you look at sort of the macro VUCA world that we continue to live in, change is the new constant. We have to be incredibly mindful as leaders in corporate world that everybody has their own personal challenges. Everybody is having their own, sort of problems outside of the work or even in work. And in order to get the best out of people and to bring everybody to be bringing them the best selves to the office, then the command and control environment does not work. A good compliance officer who is someone who says, actually, I don't know. And I need to get, whether it might be external counsel or I need to get a different perspective, but I will come back to you and I will give you an informed decision. And I think that creates and instills more trust with your stakeholders and actually reinforces that we're all human. We're not robots. I think sometimes we forget in the corporate world, we're all trying to deliver and do the best we possibly can. But the old saying, to be human, humans by nature are not infallible. We all make mistakes and it's okay to own those mistakes. The key is learning from them as well. So I think all organizations really need to be mindful of the fact that we need to encourage people to learn from mistakes, be able to make mistakes. And one of the good things in Vodafone is that, on the sort of screens and on the boards, so we've got some great phrases in the whiteboards and sort of on the sort of walls in the organisations about daring to be different and being comfortable in making mistakes, because we all learn from them. Whether you're a leader or a colleague and you have no line management responsibility, it's incredibly important that you own those mistakes, because it's a win-win situation. You either win or you make a mistake and you win because you've learned. So I'm hopeful that organisations continue to mature and evolve with their leadership style and approach, and it's more and more less towards command and control and more inclusive learning and leadership, because we need to drive much more diversity in our leadership and our thought leadership. And I think the other thing as well, Sarah, and I think it's so early days in it because it's so much in its infancy, but with the interject of AI, I think it's even more important for corporate organisations. You've got the ethics of AI and what does that bring to organisations to make sure that their decision making is sound when using AI. But that even more means that you need much more rounded leaders that are thinking very multidimensional as to how a decision is coming to the table, and that those decisions are challenged and critiqued. If it is machine-based learning, has it been driven by AI?
I think it's really interesting that you've spoken about AI, because I think it also builds in to the new generation we're seeing entering into the workforce who have fresh expectations. And I know that you're speaking about adaptive practices and meeting the needs of every generation at your organization. I wonder, have you got any thoughts about how leaders can adapt, their communication, their internal branding, or even just their leadership style in meeting not only the advent of AI, but also AI savvy generation coming into the workforce?
From a compliance perspective, I think most organizations had still not matured their compliance training to respond to the needs of the era that we're in, where we've never seen so many different generations in a potential workforce. And their needs are materially different. And we've also got a lot more neurodivergent individuals in organizations that have particular needs as well. So I think we have to be much more adaptive as organization. One size does not always fit all. Most compliance delivery and execution is usually an annual training on core topics, and most training programs for many organizations tend to be very one-dimensional. We have to really move the needle in sort of how we train and how we respond to the needs of all the generations, because they are so materially different. And out Gen Zs and Alphas, they want mixed media. They want to have gamification. They want to have interactive sessions, whereas your older generations tend to want workshop type training and education. So I think we have to really look at making sure that our training and education responds to everyone, because everybody's needs are materially adapting, because we've got different generational expectations. A lot of the new generations want much more computer-based learning, but it needs to be interactive, it needs to be bite-sized, it needs to be shorter, it needs to be much more micro learnings. As I said, the older generations tend to want much more personal interaction. So we've really got to look at, from an organizational perspective, how do we respond to those needs far better?
And just listening to you, it's a lot, isn't it, Andrea? And I think ethics leaders are just facing these tough challenges now of, I hear it more and more about tight budgets. We're still struggling sometimes to get executive buy-in, or this, or at least shirk off this perception that compliance and ethics teams are a cost to the organization. What strategies have you seen working in these environments, or what strategies have worked for you?
So my biggest strategy for compliance is compliance provides competitive advantage. Business integrity provides competitive advantage for any organization that you work in, because good compliance means good business. So if you are able to demonstrate that return on investment, and yes, there is an investment. Some people may perceive it as sunk costs, but absolutely, I never agree with that. My view is always that compliance is a driver for growth. It provides a tangible competitive advantage to the organization. If you're in a B2B business, it's how you differentiate yourself to your competitors, because you say you have the best compliance, you are perceived as providing trust to your customers because you have really strong, robust anti-bribery policies, strong ethics, strong integrity. That is how you ensure that the board, your stakeholders are behind you, and it's sort of how you position the narrative on compliance makes the difference for me. And I think it's really important that you just keep pushing the message that actually compliance isn't about rules. It isn't about, following a process or procedure. It's actually about how compliance brings competitive advantage to an organization, because it's about trust. And if a business has trust by its employees, by its consumers, by its customers and investors, you're in a winning space. You're achieving that North Star, and that's what it's all about.
It definitely emanates from you, the passion that you have around topics like trust. I wonder, have your personal values, do you think, always been there? Have they always been at the root of your leadership style? And if so, have they ever come into conflict with the demands of the role, which we've just spoken about, because, they are many?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. Yes. So personally, I've always had strong, moral compass, and I'm a great believer in strong integrity. I think in any organization, if you're in a compliance role, your moral compass and sort of where you want things to be positioned could be in compromise because of a business decision. Um, but it's about boundaries. And the good thing is that I have never been put in a situation that my boundary of compliance and integrity has ever sort of been compromised. Personally, I wouldn't ever compromise. But wherever I've had a decision and had dialogue with an organization that I've worked in from a compliance perspective, where there's been a sort of this balancing act between should we do this, shouldn't we do it, through dialogue and negotiation. I've always been in a position of balance where what we've ended up achieving has preserved my assessment of what good looks like from an integrity perspective, and also aligns with what the business has decided upon. But personally, I will never compromise on that.
It's just been wonderful speaking with you, and I definitely feel inspired around the values piece, listening to your approach. But I wonder, as you reflect back over your career, what stands out as the moment perhaps you're most proud of? And is there any regret there about anything that you've done that you would do differently, apart from the honeymoon, which we've already heard about?
I don't really. I'm a great believer in never, other than the honeymoon, really having regrets. You have learnings, so through life you learn along the way. So I never regret. I always use them as opportunities to learn how to do something different. Regretting, I just think is a waste of energy, to be perfectly honest. So I learn from the path and the decisions that I've made along the way. So I think that would be my key takeaway is, through life, just learn, keep learning. Every day is a school day, whatever the situation, personally or professionally. Learn from every day, and be grateful for every day. Uh, I think that's really one key thing that's probably kept me quite sane, is be grateful for the gift of every day that you have the opportunity to be part of, because it can bring so much wealth in the smallest of things. A great sunrise, or you family, whatever it might be, but have gratitude. And I think that sort of moves you in the right direction as well. So no regrets. And just keep learning, keep enjoying life, and don't take it all too seriously would be the other thing as well, Sarah. I'm a great believer that you do your best, and you come to work and you do the best you possibly can, and you bring your best authentic self to work. But at the same time, that balance, don't take life too seriously. It's meant to be about having fun, not only in the office, but outside as well. So always get good balance. And as I say to my team, sometimes when they're getting really upset, or, very stressed about a decision or an action, I often say to them, are you performing surgery on someone? Is this a life or death situation? Are you about to kill someone? And the response is always no. And I said, well, then don't sweat it. Let's just make an informed decision, but it's nothing to get too stressed about, because you're not in a life and death situation.
And it's so easy to get drawn in, isn't it? And feel so impassioned that you lose sight of that. I sadly, our conversation is coming to an end because I've really enjoyed it. But I am asking everyone who joins the podcast one question, Andrea, and it's if you were to create a leader's survival kit, what 3 essential items would you include in it and why?
Oh, that's a really tough question. Survival kit.
I know I'm horrible.
Um, I would have a sun timer, an old-fashioned sun timer, to remind myself that time goes very swiftly, so make the most of it, whatever you're doing. So the old sort of sun timer where you turn it upside down. So a sun timer would probably be one item.
That's so good. I really like that one.
Second item would possibly be, I think, a journal and a note and a pen, because I think the ability to reflect and just note down things, note gratitude down. Yeah, that would be my 3 survival kit. One is the sand timer. I'm not an advocate of a watch because I think people just clock watch, but just a sand timer, just to really visualize that time is fleeting and to make the most of it. And then obviously a pen and a piece of paper or a journal that enables you to put your thoughts down, reflect on what's been good, where are the things that could be better, and how you can move the needle to be better the next day.
Absolutely love those. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andrea. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I've really enjoyed it, and it's enabled me to sort of provoke my own thoughts about leadership. So, yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Insights from the Coalface, Elevating Leadership Beyond the Boardroom. I hope this conversation left you with fresh insights, new perspectives, and a deeper connection to the challenges and opportunities of leadership. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love for you to share it with your network, leave a review, or reach out to me with your thoughts. Leadership can be a lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. Let's keep learning, growing, and supporting each other. Until next time, stay resilient, stay authentic, and keep leading with purpose.